Hello, everybody. Welcome to Deadwood Tobacco Company Blow and Smoke Podcast. I am your host, Handsome Pierce. With me always is Mr. Stashman.
Good evening.
And we brought back our local historian for a chilling tale of cigar smokers from the past. Say hello to Brad Butturff.
Hi.
Hi, there you go.
There you go.
You said hi to yourself. I wasn't expecting that.
That's nice.
So we were kind of talking today, and we kind of wanted to give you a rundown about the shit show that is St. Patrick's Day, which actually this year it wasn't that much of a shit show. It was like well-behaved kids just really drunk.
Yeah. It wasn't the usual. We had to call the cops and crazy crap going on where security's throwing people around. It was a more organized chaos.
It was
normal thing. So,
and thank God we had the bigger shop because there was a lot of people here on Friday and Saturday night.
Yeah, it was a well-packed house with Heatbox in here that was playing, and he did an excellent job.
Phenomenal job.
So very good weekend for us. And at one time I counted, I think when the two clans came in, we were close to 110, I think I counted roughly, as cattle would count.
Right.
Damn.
So, and just to put that into perspective, the other place, if you had 75 people in there, you thought it was the end of the fucking world, and they just saw this place to hunker down in until shit blew over.
Yeah, this actually, we could still move around. Picture. We could still move around. We could still go clear tables and do stuff and things like that, and we didn't have a big issue with it. So it was a welcoming, nice thing to have a great big.
Well, and it was our first big, event since we've been in the new building. So that was a nice surprise to have that. Even talked to Fritz, one of our friends that does the security around town, and he said the exact same thing. He said that there wasn't a whole lot of troublemakers. There was just a lot of people having a good time and not causing any ruckus. So evidently I'm an old man saying ruckus for trouble. But yeah, it was a nice surprise. It was a really good start off to the season. I hope you guys can get down here for the next couple events, which are coming down the pipe soon. We'll have more information on that as it comes our way. Anyways, Stashman, what do you got?
Well, I spent 3.5 hours fixing my toilet today, so that was a shitty job.
That is a shitty job.
So,
but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, I had to, old house. I got a house that was built in 1904, so 1903, 1904 finished, and it was not an exciting tale of the tape today.
No. It kind of reminiscent of when we were talking to the people that were putting this place together, the contractor, and joking around with Dave saying, "Oh, I bet there's a lot of exact right angles in here," and he's like, no, not at all.
Any house that's over, any of these houses that were built in the late 1800s into the 1900s. My house at the main front door, it's got a gap, that far, and then as it goes down the door, it just slowly goes to a tight spot. So
hey, I got leveling wedges all over the fucking house.
Right. Yeah. It's
not to mention,
train wreck.
Not to mention that we live on the side of a fucking mountain, so nothing is going to be exact anyways. You could put a marble anywhere and it's going to roll somewhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just like my toilet.
Your toilet was rolling somewhere?
It damn near was.
It was.
Hence why I had to fix it.
Now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably more correct than it should be.
So anyway.
So today we are talking about significant cigar history or cigar smokers from history. Brad's going to regale us with some tales of 3 major and 1 other.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monica Lewinsky? All right.
No,
yeah.
let's not go there. Let's
not the flavor, the smoker.
Oh,
yeah,
my bad.
Yeah.
Well, let's not touch
Bill smoked it, I think, after the fact, didn't he?
Yeah, but it's basically just like having a double
It's flavored.
sweet.
It's a double.
There's some things
It's
I
green and
don't
tastes like
wanna
apples.
know. I just don't want to know.
Tastes like tuna fish. This seafood edition. Wow. No, I'm kidding. All right. Anyway.
Anywho, we have to jump off the rails real quick. It's kind of our thing, so we
Yeah.
have to at least just a titch. So which one are you going to go with first? I know that you had...
I'm going to go with the one that everybody's going to think of right away, and that would be none other than Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill.
There you go.
I mean, you've got to talk about a guy here that, with him, excess was kind of the rule of the day, whether it was cigars, alcohol. But I pick him out because I think that as far as his significance to world history, he's hard to beat. We owe this guy a lot. He was the one in 1940 basically decided and with a one-man show and his charismatic nature, his public speaking, he kept England in the war. If they had not stayed in the war, I have a feeling we'd have had a hell of a lot harder time defeating the Germans.
Right. Well, and it's good to have a charismatic speaker that doesn't sound like the other side. Our charismatic speaker, not theirs, because that was very...
Well, what helped him too, remember, before most of his speaking engagements, he was downing like 2 Boilermakers, a bottle of champagne. I mean, he knew how to prepare.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about how you're going to drink something before you go on. Well, that was no problem. It was down a few of those and then go out and change history. And
Yep. One of the stories I did hear about him that I researched a little bit was not steal any thunder from you at all, but he would be in a plane. So back then the planes were non-pressurized, right? So they'd go up. Well, as he was getting older in life, this is past World War II, and he was flying around, he had to wear an oxygen mask because of the thin air up there because non-pressurized plane. He had a specialized one where he could still
put his
cigar in there and smoke it through that. I'm like, what the hell? All right, cool. But,
one of the pictures I've seen of Churchill was during some time when he's traveling, they had him on these things they called like a China Clipper. Basically, they were flying boats.
Yep.
And he insisted one time that he wanted to be in the pilot seat. Of course, how are you going to turn down the prime minister? Right. And here it is, but he's sitting there at the yoke, and he's got the cigar in his mouth, and he's looking very determined. What's funny is then you find out later the pilot's just shitting himself.
Yeah, losing his mind.
Something happens. I got to get this guy out of the seat.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Things worked out though.
Nice.
That's kind of what Winston did. He did some crazy stuff all the time. Remember, this was a guy that when he was at 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister, he had a bathtub that he had right outside his main office. He would do dictation. He'd be sitting in there buck-ass naked in his tub with a cigar, usually with a shot of champagne. He didn't like drinking straight water. If he had water, he had to throw a shot of Johnny Walker into it.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
Wow. Got to disinfect it somehow.
Yeah, right.
But this was a guy that, when you look at a lot of his life, he had some incredible fuck-ups. When he was First Lord of the Admiralty and he was carrying out the Gallipoli operation in World War I, which turned into a complete train wreck, after he's lost close to 250,000 lives and he steps down, he decides to volunteer for military service himself. Ends up joining the Royal Scots Fusiliers. Some people think because the Scots knew something about whiskey.
Yeah.
They were giving him a choice. They thought, here's a guy that was one of the top political officials in England, and we're putting him at the front line. No, let's give him a choice. Can we put him back in the headquarters where he's a little outside the line of fire? Guess what? He's first question he asks him, he says, well, can I get a drink back there? And they were saying, no, we had a policy about drinking in the headquarters. Well, he said, fuck that. They put him in the front trenches.
Nobody minds if you have a drink in the front trenches.
No,
there you go.
British Army even had a policy about that every day.
I was going to say they had a stipend of alcohol, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
Up until this day, they still do.
Oh, do they?
You go on to they might have changed it in the last 5 or 6 years.
They did change it. But,
okay.
But yeah, for the longest time in the Royal Navy, that was your daily thing, your rum ration.
Yep. I actually went over to one of the British ships that would be with us in the thing in the Persian Gulf or whatever, or an Australian ship, and it was the afternoon rum.
Oh yeah.
So you got one drink, which on a U.S. naval carrier, unless you're out 65 days straight before, then you get a beer day, which is some shit ass junk beer that they got on special.
Sounds like the Shawshank special.
Right. Fit for human consumption stuff comes on board, and that's what you get to drink. So when they
actually discontinued the rum ration in the Royal Navy, they've actually made it into a day of mourning. They refer to it as Black Tot Day. And they actually took the rum. It was like a cistern that they would have this for doling it out. The pursers would dole it out. And on some of the ships, they were giving it like a formal funeral at sea. But no, they did discontinue it eventually. My friends that I've contacted when I do research with the Royal Navy, they talk about how they thought it was the biggest mistake they ever made. It was tradition.
Yeah, and it's like anything else. It's one of those traditions that's dying off that you just don't see anymore because of whatever PC / crap.
Don't get me going on that.
Yeah, I know. I'll try to maintain our.
I understand the whole woke thing from one perspective, but I'm like, if you're going to start picking on history. Let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about the good with the bad. And,
Well, and remember what era it was in.
True.
You only know as much as you learn, and if you don't have anything to learn, then you're not going to fucking learn. You know what I mean?
But on the case of Winston Churchill again, smoking. I mean, when he died, this is one of the weird things about him. When he was at 10 Downing Street, he was in this habit of he'd light up a stick. He'd be dictating to his secretary, wandering around, and he'd put the stick down. So he'd have this half-smoked stick, then a little later, he'd light up another one.
Right.
So here it is, he's got them laying all over the place. A while ago, they discovered one of these sticks. Believe it or not, somehow it gotten preserved. They put the thing up for auction. It's a half-smoked cigar. Goes for like $32,000.
Nice.
I've actually got a picture of that I'll throw up on the screen for everybody.
Do you?
Nice.
Oh, but
Just a nod down cigar. Look at that thing.
But this guy, that's and I pick him out simply because I studied the period of time where he had to make this decision about trying to keep England in the war. There were people that said, let's start talking with the Nazis. And his attitude was, well, fuck that. I mean, these guys are the worst sort. Of course, he had all sorts of worst sorts. This was a guy that right after the First World War was advocating that the British should go in and wage a war against the Bolsheviks. Well, they tried to. It failed.
Right.
He had a lot of political failures. But for the one time in history that they really needed him, he stepped up to the plate and he pulled it off.
Right.
But his cigars with him, you can almost not find a picture of him without a cigar. If it's not in his hand, it's in his mouth.
Yep.
And one of my favorite stories about him is they were going to eventually shoot this very formal portrait of him. They had a photographer picked up for it, but they couldn't get the right look. They wanted him to look stern, powerful,
stoic.
So the photographer comes over, takes the stick away from him. He gets mad. So he's scowling. The photographer's there. That's the look I want. And they took the picture. And that's when you look at the official portrait for him, that's how they got the look.
Oh, I like that picture. He's got a Tommy gun in his hand.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
that's pretty good.
The Tommy gun's a story in itself. He was given that. He was given that actually by the Roosevelts as kind of a show of support. Well, he kept that to heart. He made the statement about how if Parliament didn't see things his way, then he'd wave the gun around.
Nice.
It's too bad we can't do that now.
Yeah, I was going to say. Right.
So there's a special relationship between him and Roosevelt as well.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they spent a lot of time together.
One of my favorite stories about that is, here it is. He's on one of his trips over to Washington, D.C. to talk about the war and preparations for it. And they've had this long late-night conference, and lo and behold, finally he says, it's time for me to go to bed. So he takes off. Well, Roosevelt gets some idea. He's excited about it. Goes rushing down to where Churchill's staying, walks right in. Churchill's buck-ass naked. And at this point, Roosevelt's like, oh my God, should I leave? Churchill stops, throws his arms out and says, Mr. President, this is just proof that I have nothing to hide from the Americans.
Right.
But he came over here, spent quite a bit of time over here, and Roosevelt thus went over there. What was their thing? I mean, I know I vaguely remembering the shtick behind the whole thing, but that was basically conference during the war, or that was post-war?
There was talks before the United States entered the war. We know about things like the destroyer deal, where Roosevelt was trying to supply military aid to the British to keep them in the war. And there was this strong segment of the American public, of politicians that wanted us to stay out of the war. We didn't think it was our fight. Roosevelt did some pretty amazing and bizarre things. The destroyer deal, this was going to be a transaction. We were going to give the Royal Navy 50 old four-stacker destroyers. In turn, they were going to give us a 99-year leases on different ports the British had throughout the Caribbean. We know today that there was more to that destroyer deal. Those ships themselves had supplies on them. The fact that we were giving up, we were taking possession of those ports simply meant that the British could release more forces to serve. This was going to eventually be particularly important after the British disaster at Dunkirk. And I use the word disaster because it was an amazing thing that they were able to get the expeditionary force, as many men out of there as possible. But when they came over, they lost all of their heavy equipment. Their troops were heavily demoralized. There were stories about the British troops being brought away from the beaches and throwing their small arms out the windows of trains and so on. Again, Churchill stepped in, made a personal appeal, started going on saying, "Look, we've got to make a stand." He says, "We've got to get some balls here." The man was amazing. I wished we had that sort of charismatic politician today in our own, and I'm not going to go in and talk about, but this country has had a dire lack of leadership in it. Okay, enough of that.
So to button the Churchill thing up, and it probably won't button it up, but what kind of cigars did he prefer?
That's interesting. Now, Churchill was first exposed to cigars in 1895. He actually traveled to Cuba. He was a journalist of sorts. He was going over mainly because he was curious about the resistance, the Cuban resistance to the Spanish occupation. In matter of fact, one of the funny stories about that is he goes over here. The rebels first run into this guy, and they're trying to decide, is he some kind of spy and we need to shoot him? But instead they teach him how to roll cigars and how to smoke them. He really gets turned on by the whole thing.
Nice.
Part of it also may have had to do with the fact that his mom had a thing against tobacco, and so maybe it was a little bit of youthful rebellion.
Right.
But that was 1895. After that, you can trace a whole series of bizarre adventures that he ends up having. Then, of course, the cigar becomes almost a signature for him.
Right.
They had an incident when he became First Lord of the Admiralty. He started advocating some serious changes to the Royal Navy. And he ran into a lot of resistance from the admirals and officers that had been there during the Victorian Navy. And I'll save you the whole technical thing, but they argued that the things he wanted to change, he wanted to get rid of all the gunboats, he wanted to consolidate into larger warships, and they talked about tradition, and he was famous for coming out saying that the Royal Navy's tradition was the grog, the lash, and buggery. Didn't go over well with some people. And
yeah. And you also said that there was a fair amount of people that would go to a number of these British ports that you were speaking of before, and then bring back a gift for the Prime.
The Royal Navy still retained some ports strategically in the Caribbean. It was essential for the process for the Battle of the Atlantic, what they were fighting against the German U-boats. Some British naval officers would pick up cigars to bring back. I think Winston never had to worry about a supply of cigars.
Right.
Though what was fascinating in my own research, I found a particular cigar shop in London, the James J. Fox cigar store. It's still there today. You can go there and actually see this ledger they have showing all the cigars he would buy there. And I was reading one account where here he is. He's the leader of the largest empire in the world at that time. Yep. And he is wanted. The Germans literally have a bounty on this guy. But here he is. He's going to wander off on his own to buy cigars.
Run down the road and just go get some.
Yeah. He had a bodyguard that would accompany him.
Right.
And I just hate to think of this bodyguard's probably thinking about his head on a swivel the whole time.
Right.
But
nice.
No, he was. He would be my first guy to start with.
And then what were the brands that he was smoking again? I'm sorry.
The big one that he was into was now these were pre-embargo, but it was Romeo and Julieta, Gloria de Cabana. But he smoked anything he could lay his hands on. Matter of fact, one tobacconist that wrote an article about him for of all things Holt Cigars made the comment that you could tell a lot about Churchill's mood and his financial status by what he was picking up, because when he wasn't so flush, he was buying the cheaper stuff.
Right.
When he was prime minister, he was picking up some nice stuff. When he had a political success of some sort, oh God, then
he's got the good shit.
Yeah, we're going to get the top end.
So he's like me when I come into work. In the morning, I usually start out light
Right.
and get darker throughout the day,
Yeah,
depending
yeah.
on who pisses
Yeah.
me off. And then
Right.
if the first customer comes in and says it smells like smoke in here, I lose my shit and I go
Right.
straight to a heavy
Well,
duty cigar.
and usually the busier that we are and the more green that's in the tip jar, the more that we feel like we have
Right.
gained the right to go and have a good cigar.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's our own little, our own little battle fucking pat on the back.
Right.
Kind of when you're talking about Churchill, it almost reminds me of the other Roosevelt. I mean, the sordid, adventurous past of Teddy versus.
Yep.
Teddy's.
I mean, not that they were going to be mirrored or anything, but
No, Teddy was eccentric in his own odd ways. My favorite story about him was when he was with the Bull Moose Party, and here it is, he's going to go speak. Somebody
Right.
has made an assassination attempt. Somebody's taken a shot at him. But he goes up, he speaks for 45 minutes, he's coming off the podium after the speech. At this point, he points out he's been shot.
Right.
He's been bleeding. He's got a bullet in him. But he had to make that speech because it was important to him and to his party.
Right.
Yep.
But that kind of takes some balls.
well, like that show of strength. Like, I'm shot, but I still have to come across as a strong, prominent person. People can put their faith in, and Churchill at the same time, the strong, prominent person that people put their faith in.
My other favorite eccentric story about Teddy, and this is going to, he was trying to pick up a sport, a personal thing he could do for
Right.
fun. He decides to pick on boxing. So he wants to spar with somebody. So he turns to none other than the United States Navy. Navy had a boxing championship.
Right.
So they're going to get the fleet champion to come in and spar with the President of the United States. So here they are, and this
you
guy,
imagine?
this sailor's like he's pulling his punches. Well,
Right.
Teddy finally gets in his face and he says, "If you're going to come here and you're going to do this, you go in this full out."
Quit acting like a pussy and just come out and do what you're supposed to do, right?
And the guy decks Roosevelt. Puts him right
Knocks
down.
him on the ass. I remember reading about
Yeah,
this.
and here it is. He's laying, and the guy's worried. He's got this security detail, and they're thinking, "Oh my God, the guy's just killed the president." And they're standing over, and here's Roosevelt laid out, and Roosevelt's like, "Bully, now we're getting somewhere."
Right? Gets back
And-
up and goes
Yeah.
at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and to fit with the theme, Teddy smoked a cigar.
There you go.
Yeah.
Next.
Now, next person on your checklist.
This one is probably well enough known, but it'd be none other than George S. Patton. Now, what's interesting about Patton is he's another guy that if you were to look at a moment in history, now he was significant in so many, he was controversial. I mean, this guy was, Eisenhower considered him kind of a pain in the ass, but he was the right man after what they refer to as the breakout when they finally broke out of the bocage on Normandy. The American forces were trapped there in this kind of natural fortification that the French had with their farms there. The Germans used it to bottle them up. And Patton was one of the guys that was instrumental in them breaking out of there. One of the things I found was a story about him. Here it is. The American forces are advancing as fast as they can to exploit their breakout, and they run into a freaking traffic jam. So none other than George S. Patton decides, I'm going to sort the traffic jam out. So he's jumping out in his jodhpurs. He had this shined helmet, and he's got a cigar in one hand, and he's got this little riding crop in the other, directing traffic like a cop, and actually having fun the way it looked.
Right.
But he,
Patton was a wild card. He was the one that you would. What comedian said that? I want to say it was Robin Williams was one of them. He basically said, "You know how to fight wars is send all the drunk drivers into war. They don't give a shit. Just supply them with whiskey, and they're going to go fight anything. They don't care." Patton was he was a very big wild card that we threw him in when we really needed him. Basically, is what it boiled down.
Now, I don't have as much information on what he actually smoked, but he had some high tastes. This was a guy that he didn't mind drinking champagne. He was good in. He was an odd, eccentric. Did you know that he was in the Olympics?
Oh no, I did not.
He was an equestrian. He was also he was in fencing. Of course, he was a graduate of West Point, which was no small thing either.
Right.
And but then here it is. If you had to pick out a specific time in history where his influence was critical, the Battle of the Bulge. And he was the one. There's a little mystery there, and I won't go into that long story. Believe it or not, it ended up actually showing up in the movie Patton. People pointed out, if you ever watch the movie, there's a scene where they show him receiving a phone call from Eisenhower. He comes out and he announces, he says, we could still lose this war.
Yeah.
And then he orders the redirect of the Third Army to attack the southern flank of the German advance to relieve the American forces, the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. The only problem was the phone call they're showing. The Germans launched their offensive on December 16th, 1944. This phone call was recorded by Ladislav Farrago, Patton's biographer. The actual phone call took place in January. It was shortly, It was shortly after this that Patton ends up getting instructed to redirect and send his forces down to Bavaria to look for this Alpine Redoubt, this mysterious fortress that the Germans have built. And some people have contended that they told him that there was something else there, some Nazi secret weapon. There's a lot of mystery there, but you have to remember eventually Patton gets mortally wounded in a mysterious car accident.
Right.
And I've actually been able to see the car he had the accident in, but that's another story.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
So, like, it shouldn't be a secret to anybody that the prominent figures, especially under high stress situations, thus Patton and Churchill, that smoking cigars was going to be a bit of a relaxation tool for them, and maybe highly overused relaxation tool or whatever. But I mean, if you're put in those high pressure situations and you can sit there and relax your mind for 5-10 minutes at a time by puffing on a stick, fucking puff on a stick.
that brings
Yeah.
that brings up my other favorite character, and this is one people may not know as readily. And that was also during the Second World War, an Army Air Force general by the name of Curtis LeMay. Mm-hmm. Now, us out here, we should actually be thinking about that. Curtis LeMay actually spent time at what we think of today as Ellsworth Air Force
Base.
That's where they trained a lot of the B-17 crews. Yep. He would eventually be on the 8th Air Force crews that flew over Germany. Here's the thing to think about. He actually felt that he had to command. He wanted to be there in the front seat. He wanted to actually be with the pilot. So he wasn't waiting back in England for them to come back like some did. He was actually out there in the aircraft.
Right.
And it was dangerous fucking stuff. Matter of fact, I don't want to besmirch the Marine Corps, but if you were a Marine landing on a beach running into Japanese machine gun fire, or you were on an air crew on one of these B-17s, the Marine was actually safer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So here he is. He's actually flying. One of the things he said, and this was quoted for him, was if he was smoking a cigar while he was flying, he felt he wanted to be a symbol. He wanted people to realize, I'm that confident about what I'm doing here.
Right.
Now, he goes on to become critically important because eventually he leaves the European theater of the war. He ends up going to the Pacific. He's put in command of the strategic bombing campaign over Japan. Now, what a lot of people don't know is when they sent him there, they're telling him, okay, we're going to invade Japan one way or another. And they said, and when we land, if we have to put troops onto the Japanese mainland, they said, we're estimating that we're going to lose at a minimum 250,000 men. Not 250,000 casualties, 250,000 dead.
Yeah, dead. Yep.
And so they're saying, you've got a year to figure out how to bring the Japanese to their knees. Now, he advocated some extreme stuff. He was a student initially when he was with the Army Air Force in Europe. They were thinking in terms of precision bombing. They thought they could bring the German to their knees by taking out selective industries. Didn't work. He ended up following the school of thought of a British air marshal by the name of Haig. Haig was labeled by the British people the butcher because he advocated area bombing.
Right.
If we can't take out their industry, we'll take out the guys working in the industry. We will bomb civilian areas.
You just blow it out of fucking existence.
And they also
basically is what you do.
And he also invented a new concept called the firestorm. Mm-hmm. Now, LeMay took it a step further. He had a new secret weapon. He actually had a couple secret weapons. Number one, the B-29 Super Fortress, which is interesting because when you compare weapons programs, Everybody thinks about the Manhattan Project. Pretty serious. It cost more to develop the B-29.
Oh, holy shit.
Yeah. And here it is. They're going to fly those over. Well, he has a new gadget that they've thought up. Thing called napalm.
Oh.
So they start making specialized bombs to drop on the Japanese. When you bring up the topic of the atomic bomb, God, it gets people upset. We drop these bombs on these poor Japanese. And I have nothing against Japanese. But the Japanese were fucking war criminals on a degree we can. They even shocked the Germans.
Right.
I mean, the Germans killed a lot of people. The Japanese massacred 25 million Chinese.
Yep. Before World War, up into World War II. Yeah,
even
into World War II, actually.
Yeah. Well, interesting story about that. The Doolittle raid.
Yep.
Now the pilots and air crews from the Doolittle raid were expecting that they would probably be rescued by Chinese resistance, which they were.
Right.
So after this rescue takes place, we end up approaching Chiang Kai-shek to thank him for what the Chinese did to save these pilots. The story goes, Chiang stops and looks at him and he says, "Do you realize what it cost us to do that?" And they're like, "No." He says, "The Japanese came into those areas and massacred 250,000 people."
Right. Just to get a handful of pilots, air crew back from us.
Part of it was just payback.
Yeah.
Now, in comes LeMay. He's got less than a year to do this. He changes the tactics. He goes over to advocating what they called area bombing. Famously, they have the Tokyo bombing, probably the bloodiest single night in human history.
Right.
They estimate that in the course of a 6-hour raid, he kills about 130,000 Japanese civilians.
Shit. Yep.
But he's got to go to extreme measures. He's got like 10 months to figure this thing out. Well, that's the time they tell him about the atomic bomb.
Right.
The thing about that is then they tell him he cannot fly anymore. He cannot join the air crews. Why? They're worried that if the plane gets shot down and he's taken prisoner, the most secret weapons program in the world, the Manhattan Project, is going to be revealed.
Right.
That frustrated the shit out of him.
Oh, I bet.
That's not the way he operated.
Nope.
And
it was so the whole napalm side of that, just so people that do or don't know, Japanese houses back then were mainly all made out of wood. Wood and rice paper. I mean, literally,
when they were
some of their windows and stuff were like that. So
the bomb they used was one called the M69. It was like a cluster munition. To test the weapon out, they actually created basically a target city at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah.
Yep.
And where they got, and this gets into another controversial area, we had taken all of these Nisei, these Japanese Americans. Mm-hmm. We were using the items from their homes to fill
Test.
out. But napalm was such a difficult. It was developed actually by a group of scientists at Harvard University. They tested on a fucking tennis court. In fact, I was reading about one time they were going to test it on one court. The court next door's got people playing tennis. All of a sudden, here they get this massive explosion of flame, and the people on the tennis court are running for their lives. And it's about this time they decide, now we're going to move it elsewhere and
do something else.
It's a really good backhand.
Right.
But he ends up getting involved in that. They developed that weapon, and these napalm bombs were brutally ingenious.
Yeah.
They were designed that when they were dropped, they were weighted such so that some would actually pass through the ceilings and burn inside the building. Some would land on top of the ceilings, and then some were delayed. And then they would also put in delayed fragmentation weapons because, their thinking was, okay, here the things are burning. The Japanese did not have fire departments on a scale to deal with this. They were depending on, they were going to mobilize civilians to come in with buckets of sand and booms. Well, if all of a sudden you've got fragmentation bombs going off, that's going to...
It screws up your whole afternoon, basically.
But he...
I was going to have some rice and nice sushi roll, but
boom.
But I mean, and as gruesome as some of these things are that we did and that Germans did and English did and everything, it's part of war. Let's just put that out there. That is part of war. Sorry.
And let's talk about it. Strategic bombing at this point, was still in its infancy. It was a learning curve for everybody. And we're thinking in terms now that we're staging these landings against Japanese-occupied islands. The closer we're getting to the Japanese mainland, names like Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Okinawa was a damn near a Holocaust.
Oh, yeah.
And we're thinking, well, when we land, it's only going to get worse. We also knew after Okinawa that the Japanese were actually holding some of their punches there. They were not sending all the equipment. They were retaining that equipment on the home islands.
Right.
That's also when we ran into, for the first time, the kamikazes on a large scale. Yep. Now, the first kamikaze attack to ever take place was, ironically, on my birthday, October 25th, I was born in 58, but right. October 25th, 1944. And the kamikazes were not going to be a way to defeat the United States, but they were going to be a way to make the war costly. At Okinawa, they started...
made them costly, that's for damn sure.
Okinawa was the first battle we fought in the Pacific where the Navy lost more personnel to the kamikazes than we were losing to the ground fighting to the Japanese. Here we are, we're getting closer and closer to the mainland. The Japanese are just getting more tenacious.
Right.
We privately approached the Japanese through a Swiss consulate, asking them what terms it would be. We're not going to surrender. And they come right out and say, we're willing to sacrifice 20 million Japanese lives to resist you. And but LeMay comes in. Eventually, he gets this new little package, atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And so you have some debate back and forth. But I credit him for bringing the war to that conclusion that we didn't have to land and lose. And people will talk about, well, such a horrible thing to use the atomic bomb. It wasn't horrible to all these GIs that are waiting to land there. That when they heard that the Japanese capitulated.
Yeah. And it's like anything else, because if Germany would have came up with it, or Japan would have had it before us, you think they would have been shyful about using it? No.
And the Japanese...
It just is what it is.
And the Japanese were working heavily. They didn't have an atomic weapons program, but they had a biological weapons program. Talk about things like Unit 731, another atrocity, one where they were experimenting with these weapons on American prisoners of war.
Yeah.
I mean, any war that comes forward is going to have some kind of crazy shit going on. I mean, going all the way back to Spanish Inquisition. I mean, fucking far back. There's always going to be somebody that has a good idea to kill people for gain.
But back on the cigar theme.
There we go.
Hey.
Curtis LeMay loved to smoke his cigars. As a matter of fact, later in his life, when he's put in command of the Strategic Air Command, which he resolved to turn into an elite fighting force. One of the weapons they developed for that, the B-52.
Right.
So here it is. They're going to have a maiden flight of one of these nifty new bombers, and he is going to fly on that. He is going to accompany it. Well, the rule of thumb was it didn't matter what rank you were. The captain of the aircraft is in charge.
Yep.
He can tell you what's going to happen.
Yep.
Here they are in the pressurized cockpit, and LeMay pulls out a cigar. He's getting ready to light it. The flight captain turns to him and says, "Sir, you can't do that." And he's like, "Why?" And he says, "Well, we're worried that it might ignite the oxygen in here." Allegedly, at this point, he turns to the captain and he says, "It wouldn't dare." And lights
his cigar.
Lights his cigar. But he's another one that I credit. And then my last guy, which is a nod to Bill, and this guy was not a cigar smoker. He was a pipe smoker. But he was also, I credit him, and that's none other than Chesty Puller, probably the most famous Marine in history. His story is amazing because, I mean, this guy goes from a grunt, he ends up a general. But Battle of Chosin Reservoir during the Korean War, different war entirely. But lo and behold, here it is. We've got the entire 1st Marine Division, elements of the United States Army. We're up near the Yalu River in this incredibly horrid weather. And all of a sudden, we're ambushed by about 300,000 Chinese volunteers. I doubted that, but they were.
They were voluntold.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I mean, there you go.
Right.
Doesn't phase Chesty. Chesty finds out that they're surrounded. He famously, the story goes that they're in front of us, they're behind us, they're on the left side of us, they're on the right side of us. And he says, "We finally got the bastards where we can kill them." And But he ends up withdrawing the Marines. Sure, it was not what we wanted. It was a defeat, but it was better than losing 50,000 men.
Right.
And I am convinced that would have changed the Cold War entirely right there.
Yep.
Our whole policy of containment would have failed. Now, some people will argue that our policy of containment on the commies was unfair. I don't think so. Commies, you take a look at what the crap they did.
Right. Yeah, it's...
There, I'm running at the mouth really well.
Well.
But one of my favorite images of Chesty is here it is, Battle of Chosin Reservoir. And there, you can tell these guys are freezing their asses off around him, but he's there smoking his pipe. And he made a comment later again on his own. He said, look, if I hadn't been smoking a pipe there, if I hadn't been doing this, there would have been a crisis of morale.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's how he operated.
I don't know anything about this, Jaquette.
It's okay. Ask Bill. I'm sure he'll tell you.
On next week's segment, Ask Bill, we'll get to the bottom of this.
Of course, we've had, through the years, there's been Mark Twain was another big one that smoked a lot. He smoked up to 22 cigars a day, and I remember, yeah, that's what he did.
Yeah.
I remember reading. Then there was a spot. It's outside of Fallon, Nevada, and it's an old stagecoach stop. So for the Pony Express.
Yeah.
And it got buried under the sand for years and years and years, and they found it in like the 80s. It was either late 70s or 80s. I can't remember exactly, but so they found this thing, right? Well, Mark Twain wrote about it, and he goes, I've been crossing this, he basically took the Pony Express. He went with them doing sort of a, whatever you want to call it, sabbatical from his writing and everything, but he was learning because he headed all the way out west. He went all over the place. Right. And he was coming through there, and he stopped there, and he goes, the water is arsenic. It's terrible. My cigars are dried out. And it literally is on this plaque sitting outside this, what's a little Pony Express station in the middle of F nowhere, out in Nevada, in the middle of nowhere, and a salt flat. So, he's like, my cigars are, he was more concerned to be, when you read the thing, the way you're reading it, you're like, okay, the water's arsenic, this and that, but he was more pissed off. And I guess he blew a gasket because all the cigars dried out and they kept blowing apart and falling off. He was more mad about that than he was anything else.
I hate to
priorities.
Yeah.
If you look at history, cigar smokers or tobacco users in general get a pretty bad rap. Another one, Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah.
This is a guy that was popping away a box of cigars a day.
Yep.
Man, I could probably think of others that...
Along with probably a couple fifths a day, but we won't go down that road. But anyway.
Hey, this was a guy that when they found that people were complaining to Abraham Lincoln, about having this general that was like a freaking alcoholic.
Right.
And, of course, at this point, Grant was the only one that was winning battles against the Confederates.
Yep.
And Lincoln's response was, look, I'll buy him a barrel of his own if he'll just keep going and beating these guys.
Right. Yep. And he was one of the one of the bigger generals up there through the Civil War running through there. There's a lot of controversy, and it's not worth getting into, but the point being is we are where we are today.
Well, I'm not shy of controversy, trust me. Especially when you talk about the politically correct thing, and you look at some of the greatest leaders we've had, and they haven't been perfect people. They have, and some of the crap they've done hasn't been perfect.
Right.
But I don't judge them I try not to judge them by the context of today. I try to look at if I was in their shoes.
Back then, yes, of course.
And I've got to win a war. I've got to preserve the Union. Yep. So we're going to do some stuff. Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea, which was something that Grant authorized, and it was incredibly destructive. There's parts of the South. I've been to those parts of the South. They still don't forgive him for that.
Nope.
And
well, and then we should probably cover, at least comment on John F. Kennedy.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
JFK. He liked his cigars.
Just a couple.
The only thing I always like to comment, if I remember the actual number, was here before he imposes the embargo on Cuba, he makes sure they go in and buy like 1,900 cigars for the White House.
Right.
Of course, I don't know he lived long enough to smoke them all, but...
I'd like to see the humidor that's hidden down there in the White House.
Oh.
There's one down there.
Oh, there's got to be.
Yeah.
There's got to be just one with just a vast selection of fucking Cubans just
Yep.
chilling, just waiting,
just hanging out.
just aging for the last 60 years or so.
Right.
That or we'll find out now that Lyndon Johnson was a cigar smoker, and that's the whole reason it went down that way.
The thing that I think is so interesting about JFK is that he was famous for smoking these H. Upmann Petite Coronas, and he bought a ton of them. But this is a very small cigar, and actually the word is that they were machined and not hand rolled. He's such a high class guy, and to me that does not. Follow.
Right. It doesn't make sense because he's here. He's already got some wealth. The Kennedys were known for, and now he's president of the freaking United States, and he's smoking these things.
Right.
I don't smoke those things.
Do you think it was more of like this is a technological advance, these new machined cigars, and I'm going to get these? It was actually because when you look at the back date, it's like getting a wine out of a bag versus getting it out of a bottle. It's actually going to stay more fresh for longer if you get it out of a bag than if you get it out of a bottle. But your status symbol is going to say, nope, I'm smoking those fucking Cubans, and they're going to be hand rolled. Totally. I want little tiny gross hands rolling my cigars, and that's the only way I'm going to put it in my mouth. Versus the new fad of machined cigars. Now you too can have the short filler, but that kind of deal. I kind of wonder if it's like that, or what I don't know, whatever went into it, because machined cigars have gone back for over 100 years. But
I mean, I'm also worried that maybe it was Bobby that picked him up afterwards. I mean,
probably could have been. I'm sorry, where I was going with the analogy of the wine is it's said that you're going to have a more consistent and smoother flavor with machined cigars than you are going to with hand rolled. And somebody that's that particular about taste, I mean.
Well, we'll never know.
Marilyn Monroe.
I was going to say, we'll never know. Dealey Plaza took care of all that. It was
So I mean, there's these are mostly greatest cigar smokers in history. So there's obviously tons of them. Arnold Schwarzenegger, we all know about that.
Right.
Michael Jordan smoked cigars.
Yes. There was a woman that I looked up earlier that, God, what the hell was her name? Do you remember?
Marlena Dietrich, I think it was.
Yeah, and then she had a great quote. It's on my phone, and that's being used to film me right now, so I can't quite look it up. If you can do Dietrich and see her quote on there.
Oh, and obviously Fidel Castro. Which,
what?
No, I know, it's
No
crazy.
way.
Where it all started.
And then he had to quit smoking.
Yes.
Poor son of a bitch.
Yep. George Burns, obviously, Jack Nicholson, Al Capone, another big smoker. Who are we looking for?
And how the fuck, I'm sorry, while you're looking that up, how the fuck can you go through, even if they're petite Coronas, how the fuck can you go through more than 22 a day? If your average smoke on not a petite Corona, but if you're smoking a Robusto, especially a Churchill, you're looking at a 45-minute to an hour and a half long smoke to do it 20 different sticks in a day. And I get the whole lighting one, setting it down, and lighting another one. I used to do that when we could still smoke in the bars, and I was a smoking bartender. Every goddamn ashtray was filled with cigarettes that were burning.
Well, one thing about Churchill in that regard, which is kind of funny, is I was reading about how here it is. He wakes up in the morning. First thing he's doing is he's getting a glass of water, dropping a shot of Johnny Walker into it, and then he's lighting a cigar. I mean, and then the rest of the day he's not putting one out until he's getting ready to go to bed. He's at least he had the wisdom not being smoking in bed, but.
Well, we don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
What's interesting is even when they were shooting The Darkest Hour, right, which covered Churchill's segments of Churchill's life.
Yeah.
Right.
Gary Oldman did the fat suit, and he got a $150,000 cigar budget for primary shooting.
Holy
Went and
shit!
picked up, the real, the authentic, like Churchill cigar, and he goes, I'm in character, so he's smoking 12 a day. Runs through his $150,000 in 3 months of primary shooting, and then went home for Christmas holiday with nicotine poisoning.
Oh, I bet.
Oh shit!
Right? I mean, unless he was a smoker before that, that's
severe.
That's severe. Yeah, it's not something you want to fuck around with, really.
One of the things they had in that movie that I loved, and I actually double checked this, was here when they had the part about Churchill was required. The prime minister always had lunch with the king. Right. And it was this regular scheduled event. Churchill at first was kind of like, why do I have to do this? Well, here it is. He's having lunch with the king. While he's doing this, he's downing a bottle of champagne. He's pounding this away. He's got a cigar, and the king eventually goes, it says, how can a man live like that? And the only thing Churchill goes, practice.
Yeah, right? Was it King Edward the Seventh? I believe
think
was
seventh,
another.
I think.
Yeah, seventh was another big.
Eventually,
cigar
he ends up becoming a huge fan of Churchill's, but
right.
basically he kept the king out of Nazi hands, but that's another story.
Yeah, right.
Although they gave the king the option of coming to Canada, they figured I'll stay here.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say for the Royals, they stuck it out.
I mean, it's such a stressful time, man. And I'd hate to reiterate, but if I'm going to be doing that kind of shit, smoking a cigar might help just a little bit, just to ground you.
Yeah. Just to calm it down just a little bit and let life sort of...
Just so you can take it out of your mouth, look at it, blow the smoke out, and go, all right, let's talk about more shit,
yeah, right.
Well, one of the funny things from the Battle of Britain, and at the same time, is here they had this underground bunker in London under Whitehall. And one of the things they were terrified of was if the enemy somehow got poison gas in there, so they're not exactly worried about filtering the air, but here you can read about how there was like clouds of smoke. It wasn't just Churchill; it was also everybody down there was smoking.
Barreling out.
Well, Jesus Christ, this fucking thing.
Yep.
Did you break it?
It's on its way to breaking. I've had to adjust it about 5 different times.
If it's not that, your camera.
What's that?
If it's not that, then it's going to be your camera.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There you go. I think you're
Is it
back.
back?
No.
I'm coming through on your guys' speakers more than anything.
You talk about the historic smokers. I mean, then you look at the history of Deadwood and smoking here.
Oh, good Lord.
One of the things I found funny when I was doing research on the Old West was this was back when the temperance movement was a big deal.
Right.
They didn't have such a big deal with tobacco. So a lot of the bars, the saloons, would set it up so you could come inside and have a drink, but they had a window that opened up on the street. You didn't want to come in and get the demon alcohol, but you could still come out there and buy a cigar.
Right. And I mean Poker Alice, and we've discussed that.
Yeah, we've gone over that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different things, in history, and like you said, is it really going to be a big deal if somebody drinks a fifth while they're saving the nation? Is it going to be a big deal if somebody's got 5 fucking half-smoked cigars in an ashtray when they're saving their fucking country? Not really.
No.
Not really. I mean, we can find different shit to get all fucking
upset about.
warning tobacco use in this commercial. It's just I don't know. It's a ridiculous thing.
Remember, Adolf Hitler had a thing against smoking. He was freaking vegan. Oh, sorry, Audrey. But he was, we don't see him being lauded for his lack of nicotine or for the fact that he ate a lot of carrots.
Yeah. And there's a lot of shit that you can point out on that one, I'm sure. The one thing that I wanted to bring up quick before we get going here, you were talking about the armored humidor. Just let me hear about that one again.
I actually got to go to Fort Knox one time to visit the Patton Museum there.
Yep.
And they have this command trailer that he used. It was basically like a trailer. He would come along. It was where he did his planning and so on. He would meeting with officers. And you go inside it. And I guess I got the chance to get inside the thing. And here it is. You see these compartments they have that were put in there for maps and so on. They were designed to be sealed if they had to. Here's this one larger armored compartment. And I'm asking the historian there, I said,
what the hell is that?
Yeah, that's where he kept his humidor. I mean, he had an armored box. One of the funnier stories. Now, he had a dog. He had Willie, his dog of his. One time, the dog got in a cigar from the humidor, ate it, got sick as hell.
No.
He ends up having some poor adjutant take care of the dog. Right. But they pointed out later that if it had been anybody else that had messed with that cigar, they'd have probably had a court-martial. But no, it was his dog.
Most likely, right?
Yeah. But his dog, that's another matter.
MacArthur, that's another guy. He obviously smoked pipe. Some of what I've read and seen about that, a lot of that was show. But he did smoke a pipe. So his corncob pipe, his big old
MacArthur.
What he was known for.
MacArthur was big on showmanship. There's no doubt about it. That's part of the reason why he eventually gets cashiered during the Korean War. Right. Because not only was he being the showman, but all of a sudden he's coming out and saying, if we want to win this war, what we got to do is nuke them fucking Chinese. And Curtis LeMay, on the other hand, as I understand at the time, was like, well, maybe not such a bad idea. But the president said, no, we're not going to nuke the Chinese.
Right.
And
time and place for everything. Give it a couple hundred years and we'll be ready to.
Give it about 10 years, we might be ready.
That's
anyway.
what I'm saying. I'm saying
10 years? Maybe
I'm
next week.
150 years from then
Leave that
to
one
now.
alone.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you very much, Brad, for coming on and telling us some stories about famous cigar smokers. Thanks, Stash, always, for being here.
That's what I do.
Make sure if you guys want to emulate the people from the past, go on to our website at deadwoodtobacco.com. Order all your favorite sticks there. We do still have the double sweets available, so make sure that you're getting those while they're available.
Consuelo will get them out to you.
Consuelo will get them out to you.
Now,
we
what
do
the
have
hell's
the
going on
full.
with my-
Yeah, I don't know. It's wonky. We've got the full lineup of cigars. Anything that you want on there, go ahead and do that. If you want to give us a call and ask us some questions, 605-722-1510. Otherwise, make sure you're looking out for all the specials that we have on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, a bunch of the other fucking ones, Twitter. Make sure that you're looking at us on YouTube. Smash that comment button. Nope, that's not what it is. Subscribe button. Smash that subscribe button. Anything that you can do to help us out with that, that'd be great. We're trying to get our viewership up so we can give you a couple more specials coming down the road. Again, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. You can find us on YouTube, Podbean, which is our host channel, and everything that you want to listen to. I'm sorry, that's video. And anything that you want to listen to, we are on all the major streaming platforms for podcasts. Jesus Christ, let's end this thing. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Peace out. Until next time.